There is a particular kind of silence that speaks louder than any courtroom statement, any tabloid headline, or any carefully worded publicist release. It is the silence of a woman who has decided, after years of protecting someone who stopped protecting her, that she is done. That she is finally, irrevocably done. And when Nicole Kidman walked out of her Nashville home in the autumn of 2025, that silence followed her like a shadow. Calm, dignified, and absolutely devastating to the man she left behind. For nearly 2 decades, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban were held up as proof that Hollywood love could survive. Proof that fame, addiction, distance, and the relentless pressure of public life did not have to destroy a marriage. Fans believed in them. Magazines celebrated them. Award show audiences watched them and felt something warm and hopeful stir in their chests. But behind every photograph, every handhold on a red carpet, every trembling speech of gratitude Keith delivered at award podiums with Nicole watching teary-eyed from the audience, there was a different story being written. A quieter, more painful story. And now, after the divorce papers have been signed and the illusion has finally crumbled, that story is coming to light. Not through scandal or explosive tell-all interviews, but through the most powerful medium Nicole Kidman has ever used. The truth, delivered in pieces, through friends, through silence, through interviews where the words she chose said everything and the words she withheld said even more. To understand what Nicole Kidman lost when her marriage to Keith Urban ended, you first have to understand what she had already survived before it began. Because Nicole did not arrive at that 2005 Good Day USA gala in Los Angeles as a woman who had never known heartbreak. She arrived as a woman who had been through the kind of heartbreak that reshapes a person entirely. Her marriage to Tom Cruise had ended in 2001, and the wounds from that split went far deeper than the public ever fully understood. It wasn't just the end of a 10-year marriage to one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. It was the loss of her children. Connor and Isabella, whom she and Tom had adopted together, drifted away from her after the divorce in ways that were never fully explained publicly but were understood privately to be among the most painful experiences of her life. She had poured herself into that family. She had rearranged her career, her identity, her entire sense of self around being a wife and a mother. And then, almost overnight, it was gone. She rebuilt, as Nicole Kidman always does, with extraordinary discipline and grace. Her Oscar win for The Hours in 2003 was a triumph not just professionally but personally. A declaration that she was still standing, still creating, still worthy of the world's attention. But those close to her knew that beneath the polished surface was a woman who desperately wanted to find love again. Not the transactional, image-driven love that Hollywood so often produces. Real love. Messy, imperfect, committed love. The kind of love that stays. So when she met Keith Urban that January evening in Los Angeles, and felt something immediate and undeniable in his presence, she wasn't just meeting a man. She was meeting the possibility of a second chance. And Nicole Kidman, for all her elegance and composure, threw herself into that second chance with everything she had. Keith Urban was 37 years old when he met Nicole, a Nashville-born, Australian-raised country musician whose talent was matched only by his well-documented struggles with addiction. He was magnetic, warm, emotionally expressive in the way that musicians often are. He put his vulnerability into his songs rather than hiding it the way Hollywood trained its stars to do. For Nicole, that openness was intoxicating. He didn't feel like a performance. He felt real. He took months to call her after their first meeting, apparently intimidated by her stature. Friends later said he spent those months convincing himself he wasn't good enough for her. When he finally did reach out, the relationship moved quickly, built on long phone calls and a shared understanding of what it meant to be both celebrated and lonely. They understood each other's specific kind of fame, the kind that fills arenas and empties personal lives simultaneously. By June 2006, they were married at St. Patrick's Estate in Sydney, in a ceremony described by those who attended as breathtakingly intimate. Nicole wore a Balenciaga gown. Keith sang to her during the reception. The evening felt, by all accounts, like something genuinely sacred. Friends said they had never seen Nicole look so purely happy, so unguarded, so present. And then, just 4 months after the wedding, the first crack appeared. And it was enormous. Keith Urban checked himself into a rehabilitation center for alcohol addiction in October 2006. Nicole had not seen it coming, or at least had not seen the full extent of it. The man she had just married, the man she had believed was her safe harbor, was fighting a battle she hadn't fully known about. The public waited to see what she would do. Some assumed she would file for divorce. Some assumed she would issue a careful statement and quietly begin the process of extraction. Instead, she visited him in treatment. She sat with him through the hardest days. She told friends that love was not a fair-weather commitment. She protected him from the press with a ferocity that surprised even those who knew her well. And when he emerged from treatment, she stood beside him, not with the look of a woman who had endured something, but with the look of a woman who had chosen something. She had chosen him. Fully, without reservation. At the time, people called it romantic. In retrospect, people who knew her best called it the beginning of a pattern that would define the next 15 years of her life. They built a life together that, from the outside, looked genuinely beautiful. Sunday Rose was born in 2008, and Faith Margaret followed in 2010. Nicole had the family she had grieved losing. She had a husband who thanked her publicly, who cried at award shows while describing what she meant to him, who seemed to understand that she had given him something no one else could have, a reason to stay sober, a reason to fight for himself. But somewhere in those middle years, something began to shift in ways that were too subtle to see from the outside and too significant to ignore from the inside. Keith's career required him to be on the road for long stretches. Country music tours are grueling. Months away from home, night after night in a different city, surrounded by an industry culture that has never been particularly gentle on sobriety or fidelity. Nicole, meanwhile, was building her own extraordinary second act professionally, taking roles in prestige films and television that reminded the world she was one of the finest actresses of her generation. Their lives were both full and genuinely, increasingly separate. Friends who spent time with them during this period describe a couple who loved each other but had begun to love each other from a distance. Nicole craved consistency. She had spent too much of her life living inside uncertainty, with Tom Cruise, with the instability of Hollywood, with the specific terror of watching someone you love fight addiction, and what she wanted now was a home that felt like a home. A husband who came back. A family dinner that happened at the same table, with the same people, on a regular basis. Keith, by contrast, was energized by movement. By the road, by performance, by the particular electricity of being in front of an audience every night. He had built his whole identity around that energy. Asking him to settle into domestic routine was, some friends observed, a little like asking a river to stop moving. They tried to make it work. They had rules, never more than a few weeks apart, always a phone call before bed. But rules are only as strong as the people keeping them, and gradually, the rules began to slip. The phone calls became shorter. The weeks apart stretched longer. The conversations that used to feel like coming home started to feel like obligation. Nicole would be on set in some far corner of the world, and Keith would be somewhere on tour, and the distance between them would feel less like geography and more like something that had been growing quietly in the space between everything they weren't saying to each other. Still, they maintained the performance. On red carpets, they were perfect. In interviews, they spoke about each other with warmth and precision. Journalists who covered them during this period describe a couple who seemed genuinely fond of each other but who also seemed, somehow, like they were reading from a script they had rehearsed so many times they had stopped thinking about what the words actually meant. By 2023, the whispers had started in earnest. People in Nashville were noticing that Keith was home less and less. People in their social circle were noticing that Nicole seemed to be carrying something heavy that she wasn't discussing. The golden couple who had beaten the odds were, those who knew them best began to suspect, running out of road. By early 2024, the deterioration had moved beyond whispers and into something undeniable. Nicole was in London filming Practical Magic 2 alongside Sandra Bullock, a project that should have been a creative high point, a return to something lighter after years of intense dramatic work. But people on set noticed that she seemed distracted in a way that went beyond normal professional focus. She spoke less about Keith than she used to. When his name came up in conversation, there was a pause before she responded, a brief recalibration, as if she were deciding in real time how much of the truth to share. Back in Nashville, Keith had quietly arranged alternative accommodation. He told people in his circle that he needed space to think. But the truth, which emerged gradually and painfully in the months that followed, was that he had already made his decision. The marriage was over in his mind before Nicole had any idea that they had reached a point of no return. 4 months, she believed they were navigating another difficult stretch. Every marriage has them. She told herself that the distance was circumstantial. Her filming schedule, his tour, the ordinary logistical chaos of 2 enormously busy careers. She gave careful, composed answers when journalists asked about their relationship. She spoke about commitment and work and the reality that love requires maintenance. She believed what she was saying, because she had no reason yet not to. But Keith had stopped returning calls. He had stopped appearing at family dinners. His absence, which had once been measured in weeks, had stretched into something more permanent. And then came June 20th, 2024, the last time they were seen in public together, at a soccer match in Nashville. People who saw them that evening described the interaction as uncomfortable. Not hostile, but hollow. 2 people occupying the same space without actually connecting. 2 people going through the motions of a life they had stopped building together. That night, by multiple accounts, was the night Keith Urban made his final decision to leave the family home permanently. When Nicole returned from London, he was gone. No confrontation. No final conversation. No letter, no explanation, no attempt to give her the dignity of a proper ending. He had simply left. And the woman who had stayed through rehab, through years of distance, through every rough patch and repair job their marriage required, came home to an empty house and a silence so complete it must have felt like the walls themselves had changed shape. Nicole Kidman filed for divorce on September 30th, 2025. The grounds listed were irreconcilable differences. 2 words that contain multitudes, that stand in for years of accumulation that no legal document could ever adequately capture. The details that emerged from the filing told a story not of anger but of priority. Nicole requested primary residential custody of their daughters, Sunday Rose, now 17, and Faith Margaret, 14. She asked for no spousal support. She asked for no child support. Both of them had built substantial independent wealth over their careers, and money was never what this was about. What it was about, what it had always been about for Nicole, was her girls, her family, the stability she had spent 19 years building and protecting and refusing to let collapse. What made the filing additionally painful was the discovery of how long ago Keith had already accepted the outcome. He had signed his portion of the divorce paperwork weeks before Nicole filed publicly. He had been ready. He had prepared for the end while she was still hoping for a different one. The revelation that he had already planned his exit, quietly, carefully, while she was still reaching for his hand, was described by those close to her as one of the most devastating moments of the entire ordeal. And then Keith Urban performed. Just days after the divorce filing became public, he appeared on stage in Pennsylvania. He was not wearing his wedding ring. He performed one of his most emotionally charged songs, but he had changed the lyrics. Where the original words had spoken of love and permanence, he sang instead about unreasonable demands, about someone taking space and reasons. The crowd gasped. It was not a subtle gesture. It was a man using the only stage he had always had, his music, to rewrite the narrative of his marriage's end, to cast himself as the one who had been wronged, the one who had been suffocated, the one who had finally walked toward freedom. Nicole did not respond publicly. She has not responded publicly. That restraint, those close to her say, is not passivity. It is something far more deliberate. It is a woman who knows exactly what she knows, and who has chosen, for reasons that are hers alone, not to burn everything down just because she could. In the weeks following the divorce announcement, something shifted in Nicole Kidman that the people around her noticed immediately. She stopped performing composure. Not publicly. Publicly she remained as gracious and measured as ever. But privately, with friends and family, she began to say things she had been holding back for a very long time. She talked about the loneliness of the last several years. About the specific loneliness of being in a marriage that had become, in many ways, a solo project. About the exhaustion of being the one who always initiated, always apologized, always reached across the growing silence to keep the connection alive. About the way she had convinced herself over and over that if she just gave more, forgave more, stayed more patient, the man she had fallen in love with would come back to her. A Vogue cover story, published in October 2025, timed, in the strange coincidence of long lead magazine publishing, to land just as the divorce was becoming public knowledge, contained a quote from Nicole that people who know her recognized as one of the most honest things she has ever said in print. When asked about this stage of her life, she said quietly, "How many times do you have to be taught that you think you know where your life is going, and then it isn't going in that direction?" It was not a dramatic confession. It was something more powerful than that. It was a woman who had finally stopped pretending that she had everything figured out. Who had finally let the world see that even she, with all her discipline and strength and extraordinary capacity for resilience, had been caught off guard. Had been hurt in ways she hadn't protected herself against because she hadn't believed she needed to. Friends say she had held out hope until nearly the end. That even after Keith had quietly moved out, she believed there was still a conversation to be had, still a version of their future that could be salvaged. It was only when she discovered that he had already signed the divorce papers, that he had done so weeks before she filed, that he had prepared for the end while she was still preparing for a repair, that she finally understood it was over. She also began, carefully and privately, to share something else. Something that those closest to her describe as the detail that hurt her most deeply. Not the leaving, not the silence, not even the rumors that had swirled about other women in his touring circle. What hurt her most was the music. Nicole reportedly came to believe that Keith had drawn from their most private moments, their arguments, their text messages, their most intimate and unguarded conversations, and used that material as creative fuel for his 2024 album. That the words she had trusted him with in their most vulnerable moments had become lyrics that millions of people sang along to at concerts, without any idea of where they had come from. When she confronted him about it, he said nothing. And that silence, those close to her say, was the moment Nicole Kidman fully let go.